Okay, good afternoon. We were waiting for some copies of something, but I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for your patience. Apologies for the delay. We thought we were going to start right on time, and the groom's side didn't show up, so we're going to go ahead with the bride's side here. All right. I'd like to call Senate Finance to order, and we'll have the secretary please call the roll.
Senator Goycochea? Senator Harris? Senator Lang? Here. Senator Neal? Here. Senator Wynn?
Here.
Senator Severs-Gansert? Here. Senator Titus?
Still here.
Chair Don Darrell-Loop.
And I am still here. Thank you very much. Oh, Mr. Klinger, thank you for showing up. We're so happy you got here on time. So with that being said, let me tell you that if you are listening online or you would like to make public comment at the end, the number is 888-475-4499. And when prompted for the meeting ID, it will be 894-8551-0892. Please press pound. And when prompted for the participant ID, please press pound. With that, we will be going out of order on the agenda. The first item that we will be listening to and introducing will be a BDR S1210. So Mr. Thorley, when he is ready, we'll start with that and then we will go forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wayne Thorley for the record, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. So as the chair mentioned, we will begin with BDR 1210, makes various changes regarding state financial administration and makes appropriations for the support of the civil government of the state for the 2023-25 biennium. This is commonly referred to as the Appropriations Act. Mr. Kucera from the Fiscal Analysis Division will walk the committee through the various sections of the BDR. This bill will be an assembly bill when it is introduced, so we are just hearing it as a BDR. No action will be taken by the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Thorley, John Kucera, LCB Fiscal for the record. This afternoon, I'll be running through BDR S1210, as Mr. Thorley indicated, is also known as the General Appropriations Act. I am joined behind me by colleagues Morgan Barlow, Tiffany Greenemeyer, and Stephanie Day, who are all instrumental in the drafting of the 2023 General Appropriations Act. I'd also like to extend thank you to LCB Legal for all of their help in drafting this bill. Beginning on page 1 of the Act, the Appropriations Act implements budget decisions made by the money committees for state general fund and highway funded budgets, as well as back language to implement money committee decisions related to appropriated funding. Sections 1 through 33, beginning on page 1 of your packet, include general fund appropriations for the operation of state government totaling $3.454 billion in fiscal year 2024 and $3.588 billion in fiscal year 25, or a combined $7.042 billion over the 23 to 25 biennium, an increase of approximately $1.026 billion when compared to general fund appropriations approved by the 2021 legislature for the 2021 to 23 biennium. Fiscal staff will note Section 33 is new for peace officer standards and training as part of governor recommended funding source changes from court administrative assessments to general fund appropriations. Moving to Section 34 on page 18, include highway fund appropriations totaling $167.5 million in fiscal year 2024 and $168.6 million in fiscal year 25, or a combined $336.1 million over the 23 to 25 biennium, an increase of approximately $30.8 million from the prior biennium. Budgets excluded from the prior sections from the Appropriation Act include 6 K through 12 budgets that are included in the Education Bill, general fund appropriate authorizations for the Gaming Control Board and Gaming Commission, as well as highway fund authorizations for the Department of Transportation that are in the Authorizations Act, and both highway and general fund salary adjustment funds appropriated to the Board of Examiners in the pay bill. Staff also note general fund appropriations in the back language of this act detailed later in the presentation, totaling $14.9 million in fiscal year '23, $13.5 million in fiscal year '24, and $6.9 million contingent upon the outcome of related legislation. Moving to section 35 on page 19 of the bill. This is continuing language noting appropriations must be expended in accordance with Nevada Revised Statutes, Chapter 353, Section 150 to 353.246 inclusive, which is also referred to as the State Budget Act. Section 35 notes funds are appropriated to separate fiscal years and transfers between categories will be made in accordance with the State Budget Act with the approval of the Interim Finance Committee upon the recommendation of the governor. This section excludes entities that are exempt from the State Budget Act, including the Legislative Fund, the Supreme Court, and the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. Moving to section 36. Sections 36 through 45 allow for the availability of appropriations between fiscal years. Section 36 enumerates 24 budgets that are allowed to transfer appropriations between fiscal years. Based on subcommittee recommendation and action, the victims of crime and public option budgets were added to the section. Otherwise, the initial budgets are all carry forward. This is generally allowable for agencies that have program components that may or may not be out of their control and components that are difficult to predict. Continuing to section 37, also on page 21 of your bill. This is carryover language that allows for the transfer of appropriations related to deferred maintenance or extraordinary maintenance between fiscal years of the 23 to 25 biennium within the same budget. Section 38, also on the same page, is carryover language that allows $25,000 appropriated to the Governor's Finance Office special appropriations budget is intended to support Civil Air Patrol over the 23 to 25 biennium. Section 39 on the following page is carryover language that allows for $1 million in general fund appropriations each year of the 23 to 25 biennium to be available for expenditure in either year of the biennium related to broadband improvement for schools in the Office of Science and Innovation and Technology. Section 40, continuing on the same page, is also carryover language and allows $8.5 million appropriated to the Office of Science, Innovation, and Technology to support graduate medical education, and notes this is available for both fiscal years of the biennium. Fiscal staff notes that previously this was appropriated to the special appropriations budget within the Office of the Governor's Finance Office, however, is being directly appropriated to the Office of Science, Innovation, and Technology. Section 41 is new language that allows $3.1 million in each year of the 23-25 biennium to support Secretary of State credit card processing fees, and notes that these appropriations are available in either year of the biennium. Moving to section 42 of the bill, this is revised language that relates to the Supreme Court and allows for the transfer of operating funds between fiscal years for certain Supreme Court budgets. Note supplemental or contingency account requests shall not be made from the Judicial Department branch salaries budget. $650,000 appropriated in each fiscal year is available in either year to support the implementation of a new statewide digital evidence management system as approved by the legislature. Remaining portions of $1.4 million in fiscal year '24 to build a hybrid training facility at the Supreme Court Law Library in the Carson City Supreme Court building must be transferred to the Supreme Court budget, and unused portions of the appropriation in fiscal year '24 to support multi-county integrated justice information system projects must be transferred to the Administrative Office of the Court. Section 43, continuing on page 25 of the bill, is existing language that allows $179,680 in each year of the 23-25 biennium to be available for either year to support the Conservation and Natural Resources Administration contract services to update the Conservation Credit System Manual and Nevada Scientific Methods document, as well as the Habitat Quantification Tool. Moving to section 44. This is new language that allows $840,284 in fiscal year '24 and $63,000 in fiscal year '25 for the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources Division of State Lands budget to replace the division's lands management system to be available in either year of the biennium. And finally, the last section in this section is section 45, is carry forward language which allows $2 million in each year of the 23-25 biennium to be available for either year of the biennium to support Department of Motor Vehicle credit card fees. The following sections, 46 through 49, include exceptions to standard reversion document requirements. Section 46 at the bottom of page 26 of the BDR is carryover language that requires any remaining balance of the $1 million appropriation made in 2015 to support sagebrush improvement projects does not revert to the general fund. Section 47, also continuing at the bottom of this page, is carryover language noting appropriations in the knowledge account and the Main Street account within the Governor's Office of Economic Development must be carried forward and do not revert to the general fund. Section 48, continuing on page 27 of your document, is carry forward language requiring appropriations to the Nevada System of Higher Education Trust Fund for the Education of Dependent Children, does not revert to the general fund. Section 49 is continuing language also for the Nevada System of Higher Education Special Projects budget, allowing funding to be carried forward up to 2 fiscal years before it must be reverted to the general fund. This is funding that's used to match documented research projects. Sections 50 through 62 generally allow for the transfer of appropriated funds between or among budgets. Section 50 on page 27 and moving on to page 28 is continuing language allowing for the transfer of appropriations related to salaries between budgets within the same department or division. Section 51, also on page 28, this notes that carried forward language stipulating that amounts appropriated to the legislative fund are available for either fiscal year and may be transferred among the legislative budgets. Moving on to section 52, also on page 28, is continuing language allowing the Division of Welfare and Supportive Services to transfer funding appropriations among its budgets. Section 53 is continuing language allowing transfers between the Medicaid and checkup budgets within the Division Healthcare Financing Policy. Section 54, moving to page 29 of your packet, is continuing language allowing transfer of general fund appropriations among the 3 Division of Child and Family Services juvenile justice budgets within the Department of Health and Human Services. Section 55 is continuing language allowing transfers between the 2 Division of Child and Family Services mental health budgets. This is the Northern Nevada Child Adolescent Centers and the Southern Nevada Child and Adolescent Centers. Section 56, still on page 29, is new language allowing transfers among the Division of Public and Behavioral Health budgets. 57 is carry forward language relating to the upper payment limit. This is budget account 3260, which allows for transfer of savings realized in the Department of Health and Human Service budgets to fund the state share of the Private Hospital Collaborative Supplemental Payment Program and to fund reversions to both the general fund and the Fund for a Healthy Nevada. Moving on to section 58 on page 30, moving on to page 31 of your packet, is continuing language allowing transfers among the regional center budgets within the Aging and Disability Services Division budgets. Section 59 on page 31 is continuing language allowing for the transfer from either the Medicaid or checkup budgets to the administration budget within the Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy to support administrative activities. Section 60, still on page 31, is continuing language that allows for the transfer of funds among the Nevada System of Higher Education budgets. Section 61 is continuing language that allows for the transfer of Nevada System of Higher Education performance funding between the appropriate budgets and allows for funding to be balanced forward for 1 fiscal year to meet performance measures. If performance measures are not met in the subsequent fiscal year, funds may be used to support need-based scholarship programs. Section 62 on page 32 is continuing language that allows for the transfer of funds among the Department of Correction budgets. The next sections, 63 through 70, include restrictions or qualifications that are related to appropriated funding reflecting the will of the money committees. Section 63, still on page 32 of the BDR, is new language relating to appropriated funding for the Public Employees Benefits Program and requires funds to be expended to support additional health savings account or health reimbursement arrangement contributions of between $300 and $500 depending on the participant type. Section 64 on page 33 of the BDR is carryover language which expresses the intent of the legislature to continue the current service delivery model related to prescription drugs for the Medicaid and checkup programs over the 2023 biennium. Section 65 is also carryover language which specifies that appropriations made to certain healthcare financing and policy and welfare and supportive service budgets are limitations and that supplemental appropriations shall not be requested except under certain conditions, including changes in federal reimbursement or program structure. Section 66, moving on to page 34 of the BDR, is also carryover language, which specifies that the appropriations made to Washoe County and Clark County child welfare budgets, accepting support for the adoption subsidy program, are limits and that those budgets shall not request supplemental appropriations. Sections 67 and 68, continuing from page 34 to 35, is new language which establishes a minimum wage for direct care workers of personal care service agencies equaling not less than $16 per hour of the $25 per hour increase rate received from Medicaid providers as well as Aging and Disability Services Division providers. This is effective January 1, 2024, when the rate increase is effective for Aging and Disability Services Division, and effective upon notification of the Director of the Legislative Council Bureau by the Director of the Department of Health and Human Services that the Medicaid rate increase has received federal approval, but not earlier than January 1 of 2024. Section 69, staying on page 35 of the BDR, specifies that the Director of the Department of Health and Human Services shall reimburse providers of applied behavior analysis, or ABA, services that align with the approved Medicaid and checkup budgets, notwithstanding statutory provisions that require rates to align with the median rates of comparable states. As discussed and approved by the money committees, this language allows the department to pay rates that are greater than comparable states. Section 70 is carryover language that requires the Nevada System of Higher Education to comply with any gubernatorial request to set aside funding. Sections 71 and 72, beginning on page 35 and moving on to page 37, relate to allowable general fund advances. Section 71 is carryover language that allows for a general fund advance to the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources in the event of delayed receipts related to forest fire suppression. Section 72 is also carryover language with an updated amount that allows for a $50,000 general fund advance to the Office of the Military in the event the Nevada National Guard is ordered into active duty. Sections 73 through 78, beginning on page 38 of the BDR, relate to restricted interim finance committee contingency allocations. Section 73 includes a $50,000 IFC contingency allocation in fiscal year 24 for additional contractual support related to the Department of Agriculture. Section 74, also on page 38 of the BDR, it includes $2.4 million in fiscal year 2025 for allocation to the Aging and Disability Services Division, community-based care for staffing and associated expenditures. Section 75, moving on to page 39 of the BDR, also includes an allocation for the Aging and Disability Services Division. However, this is adult protective services, staffing, and associated expenditures. Section 76, moving on to page 40, includes $1.5 million in fiscal year 25 for allocation to the Aging and Disability Services Division, long-term care ombudsman staffing and associated expenditures. Section 77 at the bottom of page 40 and moving to page 41 includes $638,472 in fiscal year 24 and $586,956 in fiscal year 25 to support staffing and associated expenditures at the Desert Willow Treatment Center for allocation by the Interim Finance Committee to the Division of Child and Family Services of the Department of Health and Human Services. Finally, within this series of sections is Section 78, includes $1.7 million in fiscal year 25 related to the Tonopah Conservation Camp for allocation to the Department of Corrections. Continuing through, Sections 79 through 85 relate to general fund appropriations or extensions of general fund appropriations approved by the prior legislature. Section 79 is a carryover section including an appropriation of $181,158 over the 23-25 biennium to support the legislator's retirement system. Section 80, still on page 42 of the BDR, includes $14.9 million appropriation to support the cost of the 82nd legislative session. Section 81, still on page 42, is new language providing a $2 million general fund appropriation in each year of the 23 to 25 biennium to provide active and retired state employees with life insurance to the Public Employees Benefit Program. Section 82, moving on to page 43 of your packet, is new language that provides for a $6.9 million general fund appropriation to support the continued replacement of the shared radio system to the Nevada Department of Transportation. This section is contingent upon Assembly Bill 477 not being enacted by the legislature. Section 83, beginning on page 43 and continuing to page 44, extends the reversion date of a $2.2 million appropriation made to the Department of Corrections to support the offender management system, as approved in Section 1 of Assembly Bill 462 of the 81st Legislative Session. This extension is to June of 2025. Similarly, Section 84 extends the reversion date of a $1.4 million appropriation made to the Department of Correction to support the reintegration of the offender sentence management system into the Nevada Offender Tracking Information System, which is also approved in Assembly Bill 462 of the prior session in Section 2. This extension is to June of 2025. Moving to page 45 of the BDR, Section 85 extends the reversion date of a $1.1 million appropriation made to the Office of Federal Assistance in the Office of the Governor for personnel and operating costs and the cost of upgrades to the grant management system, which was approved in Section 29.63 of Assembly Bill 445 of the 2021 session. Sections 86 through 93 are continuing sections that are generally included in the Appropriation Act. Beginning on page 45 and moving to page 46 is Section 86 that notes, aside from noted exceptions, this section specifies standard reversion date for unspent general fund appropriations. Section 87, also on page 46 of the BDR, requires the controller to process claims and specifies the final day to process claims within each fiscal year of the 23-25 biennium. Section 88 directs the controller, also on page 46, to establish funding as directed in the 2023 Appropriations Act. And getting down to the final few, Section 89 directs the controller to pay salaries for certain elected officials in biweekly installments. Section 90 on page 47 specifies permissible actions if the general fund balance is reduced below $150 million during the interim. Section 91 on page 48 is carryover language relating to payments made to the federal government under the Federal Cash Management and Improvement Act of 1990. Section 92 accounts for changes in names of state officers or agencies. And finally, Section 93 includes all of the effective dates for the preceding sections. Madam Chair, that concludes the presentation. Happy to address any questions the committee may have.
Okay, thank you. Questions, committee? I know that was a lot of information, so I'll give you just a minute to process. Senator Neal, start us off.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I know state libraries are in the bill, and I know that people are, I don't know how to say this right. Let me say it wrong. That people still have their hand out for money. So there was, I believe, libraries still asking for money. How does that work in this context of this BDR? Is this subject to change? Or, okay.
Mr. Thorley, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wayne Thorley for the record, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. So this BDR S1210 represents the actions of all the subcommittees and the joint money committees in closing the various budgets for state government. If a member would like to provide additional funding to state agencies, that could be accomplished through a separate bill. This bill generally is only for those actions that were taken by the money committees.
Thank you.
Senator Titus, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that very concise presentation. I know we have the numbers in front of me, but you're the numbers guy. What's the total amount of monies we just are proposing to appropriate?
Senator Titus, John Cusero, LZB Fiscal, for the record, within the initial sections of the General Appropriations Act includes $3.454 billion in fiscal year 24 and $3.588 billion in fiscal year 25, totaling $7.042 billion over the biennium. This does not include the additional appropriations in back language totaling $14.9 million in 23, $13.5 million in 24, and $6.9 million contingent upon related legislation.
Great, thank you. And just so to reiterate that, so up to page 19, you gave us the first total, and then everything after that section, then section 36 on was a separate total.
Correct.
Great,
Senator
thank you.
Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question.
Can I do a quick?
Mr. Thorley, please.
Just one other thing, Senator Titus, Wayne Thorley for the record, LCB Fiscal. The appropriations for the support of K-12 schools is not included in this budget. And so if those numbers sounded a little low to you, it's because the appropriations for operations of K-12 public schools is in a different BDR that we'll be hearing later this evening.
And John Cusero, LCB Fiscal, for the record, just a final clarification, that did not include highway fund appropriations in the Appropriation Act, including $167.5 million in 25 and $168.6 million in fiscal year, excuse me, first number is 24, second number is fiscal year 25.
Would you repeat that total, please?
Yes,
Thank
Madam
you very
Chair. It is $7.042 billion in general fund appropriations over the 23 to 25 biennium.
Okay, additional questions? Senator Gokachia.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and this is pocket change, but I'm kind of concerned about, we had $1 million appropriation in 15 to the sagebrush habitat improvement. How much of that is left? Can you tell me right offhand, otherwise I can check with staff? And I know this is not the Ecosystem Council, but I'm kind of concerned about where that's going.
Senator Gokachia, John Cusero, LCD Fiscal, for the record. As of the fiscal year 22 closing, the general fund balance within the sagebrush budget account was $646,800.
Thank you. It's significant. They haven't spent much, I guess, so thank you.
Thank you. I was hoping you'd get out your checkbook, Senator. Senator Gansert, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions. So first of all, as far as the back language, you kind of went, or the language you went through and said this is a change. Is there anything that's a significant change? Because sometimes it's just amounts of money. Sometimes it could be like something that's not going to get reverted that was reverted before. Can you help with that?
Sure, Senator. I'll do my best to give a concise answer to your question. The sections that were noted as either carryover, again, tend to be standard language. An example of something that has a minor dollar amount change would be the contribution to the legislative retirement system. New sections of potential interest for the subcommittee, or excuse me, for the committee that are not continuing language includes sections 67 and 68 as approved by the committees related to a minimum wage established for direct care workers of personal care services. Section 69 is also new and is not carry forward language related to applied behavior analysis rates, indicating to the Director of the Department of Health and Human Services to pay rates as established by the money committees, which is in conflict with current statute.
Okay. And then, in looking at section 15, literacy programs, page 6, so under Department of Education, there's about $1 million each year, 979, 980, and 969. So those are the only funds, or is that for the management of literacy programs? It's not, because now that we use the pupil-centered funding plan, we don't necessarily have a separate amount of money for literacy programs unless this is like a piece of it, or is this just for administering literacy programs?
Wayne Thorley for the record, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. Senator Severs-Gansert, the appropriations in Section 15 related to the Department of Education are for their operating budgets. Appropriations for the operation of K-12 programs will be in a different BDR that we'll hear later this evening.
Okay, and then when I look at section 10, page 4, the legislative fund, does that include all the employees that were approved in the closing for Southern Nevada expansion? I'm looking at page 4, section 10. Administrative division, legal division, research division, those are all rolled in there?
Yes, that is correct. Wayne Thorley for the record. The appropriations listed under Section 10 on page 4 include the additional positions for the Legislative Council Bureau for the Las Vegas offices as approved by the money committees when the LCB budgets were closed.
Thank you. And then section 11 is the Supreme Court. So is there back language that states that these funds are now in a separate pool of funds that they can control, and that anything left over is reverted? Is that within this bill?
Wayne Thorley again for the record, Senator Severs-Gansert. So there's it's in a couple different places. There is back language that Mr. Cusera went over, and he can go over it again here about that carries out the money committee's decisions related to closing the court's budgets and authorizing a pot of money that the judicial branch can use to spend on salaries. The other piece is Senate Bill 58, which was heard in Senate Finance on Saturday morning. There was an amendment proposed that would put in statute similar language to the governor's office, what the governor's office currently has in statute, that says the money appropriated for the salaries of the judicial branch can be allocated by the judicial branch within the limits of the legislatively authorized appropriation. So those decisions would be effectuated through the passage of both the Appropriations Act and Senate Bill 58.
Thank you. And I think section 42 is the other one that's around the Supreme Court.
John Cusera, LCB Fiscal for the record. Mr. Thorley is absolutely correct. Very specifically in section 35, subsection 3, notes that the Supreme Court of Nevada is exempt from several of these provisions, as well as section 42 allows for additional flexibility for select Supreme Court budgets.
All right. Thank you.
Senator Wynn.
Thank you. And I guess I just have a couple of things to confirm. Mr. Cusera, you had, do you have that number? And I think you may have mentioned it, but I just want to confirm. I know that the governor decided not to include a bunch of costs in the operating budgets that are included in this document, and they were pulled out, and we've seen maybe 100 or so of these one-shot appropriations. And what was the total of those one-shot appropriations that perhaps would have been incorporated into these operational budgets but are now one-shot appropriations. I think you said it was 1 point something billion. Is that correct?
Senator John Kucera, LCB fiscal for the record. I don't have the sum total of the other one-time general fund appropriations. This is certainly information that we can gather for you, and/or if Mr. Thorley has a save for me here.
Mr. Thorley, can you confirm that, and do you have that number as well?
Yes, I'm just opening the spreadsheet right now. Going off the top of my head, it's $1.086 billion. If my computer will load, I can confirm that. Yes, $1.086 billion is what the governor recommended in his budget for one-shot appropriations. That's for FY23 only. The governor also recommended one-shot appropriations of $394 million in FY24 and $93.5 million in FY25. All one-shot appropriations are included in separate bills and are not included in the BDR that Mr. Kucera just went through.
Thank you so much.
Any additional questions? Senator Kucera.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to go to Section 71, which is Conservation Natural Resources. The way I read this, then the Director of DCNR can, in fact, request a loan against any billed balance for fire suppression. But then I get concerned with, then it has to be repaid by the last business day in August of that fiscal year. Historically, we haven't seen that happening. I mean, the receipts coming in adequate to cover. That's why we've been running for a deficit. What's the penalty there? Am I making sense?
Wayne Thorley again for the record, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. This is existing language that allows the Nevada Division of Forestry within the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources to receive a general fund advance to cover costs related to wildfire suppression. They have not used this authority in quite some time. That I can't even think of the last time that they've used it. But it has historically been included just in case there was a large wildland fire incident or other incident that required extraordinary expenditures beyond what they were budgeted for. It allows them to access money needed to respond to that.
Okay, I thank you. Then you're telling me this is language in the bill, but typically we don't use it. I can see why, because it just won't work probably. Again, if it has to be billed and has to be recovered in the same fiscal, it's not happening. You know, we're 3 years behind with most of these federal bills. So thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you very much. Senator Titus, did you have a question? Anybody else have a question? All right. Thank you very much. And we are not taking action on these this evening. So with that, we can move away from that and go to BDRS 1211, 1211. Are you ready? Okay, thank you. Welcome, and thank you so much for your time. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Julie Waller with the Fiscal Analysis Division, and tonight I'm joined with my colleagues Nicolette Johnston to my right and Colby Nichols to my left. They were assisting in the preparation of this bill, as well as Brody Leiser, who is, as you know, in the Assembly. Tonight, we're going to walk through the BDR S12, which implements the 2023 CIP. The Money Committees closed the 2023 Capital Improvement Program on May 10th, 2023. We'll walk through the summary of legislation in the BDR, and I would note that a number of projects have multiple funding sources, and as such, they'll be listed in multiple sections of the bill. On page 1 of the BDR, I would also note that at the top right corner of the BDR, this BDR and bill will require a 2/3 vote because of the property tax included in the bill. Section 1 on page 1 appropriates $422.2 million in general fund appropriations to support 66 projects in the 2023 CIP for various agencies identified under this section. Of note, on page 2, project 23C36, it's improvements for buildings purchased in Las Vegas of $74.5 million. Also, building purchase and improvements in Carson City. Project 23C37 is $22.3 million. Walking through again some of the more notable projects funded with general fund on page 3. At the bottom of page 3 is project 23M04, a maintenance project for the Department of Corrections at the Southern Desert Correctional Center for $21.4 million. Moving forward again through page 4 and 5. On page 5, the capital improvement project for the Department of Health and Human Services in the middle of page 5, 23M02, $37.8 million of general fund appropriations. Moving forward to page 6, we have 3 projects identified for the Nevada System of Higher Education. For 2 projects for deferred maintenance, and another for a Desert Research Institute chilled water central plant renovation. Also on page 6, number 7, for capital improvements to the Department of Public Safety, project 23P01. It's a planning project. General fund appropriations of $11.8 million. Moving forward to page 7. Another notable project is the Advanced Planning North Las Vegas State Veterans Home, project 23P04, and that's for $15.5 million. Section 2 at the bottom of page 7 limits the authority for expenditure through June 30, 2027, and establishes a reversion of any remaining funds for the project identified in section 1. CIP projects typically have a 4-year period in which funds are appropriated and/or authorized, and therefore this section provides for that time period. Similar reversionary language is included in sections 4, 7, and 9 to address the reversions of various sources of funds to support the 2023 CIP. Turning to page 8. Section 3 appropriates $11.5 million from the State Highway Fund to support 4 DMV projects, 1 public safety project, and 1 statewide paving project in the 2023 CIP program. Again, Section 4 is the reversionary language for the Highway Fund appropriation. Section 5 on page 9 restricts the transfer of funds from the Highway Fund for projects identified in this section until contract payments are required. The bottom of page 9, section 6, authorizes $533.7 million in new general obligation bonds for projects which are identified under this section, beginning on page 10. This section also reallocates $5 million of bonds previously issued under prior CIP legislation from 2019 CIP projects identified under this section. This will allow for bond proceeds already issued to be spent before the proceeds of any new bonds issued pursuant to this section. And walking through the list of projects that are funded with bonds. Of note, on page 11, Project 23C30 is the construction of the administration building on the Kincaid building site here in Carson City for $158.5 million. Right below that, the purchase of buildings for state offices in Las Vegas. That's 18 office buildings, and that would be Project 23C35 for a total of $213.9 million. Moving on to page 12, I would note the top of page 12, Project 23C33 authorizes $17 million for the Southern Nevada Small Arms Range for the Army National Guard. And for the Department of Veterans Services, Project 23C06 is the remodel and addition of the Southern Nevada State Veterans Home in Boulder City for $35.8 million. Section 7, again, is a reversionary language for the bond proceeds, for unexpended bond proceeds. Section 8 authorizes $111.3 million in general obligation bonds for the department, for 5 Department of Motor Vehicle projects, including Project CIP 23C02, which can be found on page 13, and that is the new DMV Silverado Ranch facility in Las Vegas. This section also establishes the required annual debt service payment on bonds for these projects from the Highway Fund. Turning now to page 15, section 10. This specifies that the State Board of Finance will issue general obligation bonds for the 2023 CIP when it is deemed appropriate. Subsection 2 allows the state controller to advance general fund money if bonds have not yet been sold to finance projects approved in the 2023 CIP. Subsection 3 at the bottom of page 15 allows the state controller to advance highway fund monies if bonds have not yet been sold to finance project approved for the 2023 CIP. Moving to page 16, if general funds or highway funds are advanced, the amounts must be immediately repaid to the general fund or the highway fund upon the issuance of the bonds. Subsection 4 on page 16 requires written notification from the Director of the Office of Finance to the State Controller, the State Treasurer, and the Senate and Assembly Fiscal Analysts if a general fund appropriation and/or highway fund advance has been approved, and a reconciliation demonstrating the general fund and/or highway fund has been reimbursed. On page 16, section 11 authorizes $102.4 million from funding sources other than the general fund or the state highway fund for projects identified in this section. This includes authority for federal funds, agency funds, from bonds issued under the and proceeds from the bonds issued under the Conservation Bond Program for the support of 2 CIP projects. I would note there are 7 projects here included that are funded with federal funds, 4 projects that would be funded with agency funds, and as mentioned, 2 projects that would be funded with proceeds from the Conservation Bond Program. On page 18, again, the top of the page 18, the 2 projects that are funded with the Conservation Bond funds are the Nevada State Railroad Museum, Boulder City, as well as a remodel of the Freight Barn East Ely Railroad Museum. And those 2 projects total $27 million. The remodel and addition of the Southern Nevada State Veterans Home is funded with federal funds totaling $63.9 million. And subsection 2 requires the State Public Works Division to not execute a contract for construction of a project approved in the 2023 CIP that includes authorized non-state receipts until the division has determined that the non-state funding authorized has been awarded or is available for expenditure. Section 12, in the middle of page 18, requires that if the Department of Veterans Services receives a grant from the U.S. Department of Veterans Services for CIP Project 23P04, Advanced Planning North Las Vegas State Veterans Home, the department shall immediately deposit the money received in the state general fund. The bottom of page 18, section 13, requires that the State Public Works Division use only qualified personnel to execute the 2023 CIP. Section 14, at the top of page 19, requires state and local government entities cooperate with the State Public Works Division in carrying out the provisions of the 2023 CIP. Section 15 approves $3 million in bonds for the cultural centers and historic preservation grant programs. Subsection 2 clarifies the term proceeds means amounts received from the sale of bonds as well as any accrued interest. Section 16, the middle of page 19, approves $13 million in bonds for the Lake Tahoe Basin Environmental Improvement Program with authorized uses of the proceeds provided in Assembly Bill 484 of this session. Section 17, the bottom of page 19, approves $43.3 million in bonds for conservation programs authorized under Assembly Bill 84 from the 2019 legislative session, inclusive of the $27 million to support 2 of the CIP projects for the Division of Museums. Turning now to page 20, section 18 provides additional explanation that is intended that the bonds issued under section 16 and 17 are exempt from the constitutional debt limit. Section 19, this is the section that requires the 2/3 vote, approves ad valorem taxes for general obligation debt service and the question 1 bond program, the conservation bond program established through AB 84 of the 2019 session. For the state's general obligation debt, 16.18 cents on every $100 of assessed valuation will be used to support existing general obligation debt of the state for prior bond issuances, as well as for the bonds that are sold for the 2023 CIP. For the Question 1 program and the Conservation Bond Program established through Assembly Bill 84 from the 2019 session, 0.82 cents for every $100 of assessed valuation will be used to support the bonds that were sold for the Q1 program and that will be sold for the Conservation Bond Program established through AB 84 of the 2019 session. The overall rate of 17 cents per $100 of assessed valuation remains the same as approved for the current biennium. Turning to page 22. Section 20 requires that the state treasurer will estimate sufficient funding and determine whether that amount exists in the Consolidated Bond Interest and Redemption Fund to pay the principal and interest on past CIP issuances, as well as current bond issuances. If there is not enough money in the Consolidated Bond Interest and Redemption account, the treasurer can request of the state controller to reserve money in the general fund to pay those debts. At the top of page 23, Section 21 authorizes the State Board of Finance to pay the expenses related to the issuance of general obligation bonds. Section 22 authorizes money to pay for the bonds in the Consolidated Bond Interest and Redemption account. This would amount to $174.5 million in each year of the 23-25 biennium. Section 23, the bottom of page 23, authorizes the State Public Works Division and the Nevada System of Higher Education, with the approval of the Interim Finance Committee, to transfer money from one project within the same agency to another. Turning to page 24, Section 24 approves $3 million from the Special Capital Construction Fund for allocation to the Nevada System of Higher Education Deferred Maintenance CIP Project 23M01 and requires balance of this funding remaining on June 30th, 2027 to be reverted to the Special Capital Construction Fund for Higher Education on or before September 17, 2027. Beginning at the bottom of page 24, section 25 through section 27 on page 27, These sections revise the reversion language from prior CIPs to extend the reversion dates, thereby extending project authority for 2 years for the projects listed in these sections. Section 26 also allows for the reallocation of bonds issued under prior authorization approved by past legislatures for use for projects identified in Section 6. And as you will recall, that was $5 million. On page 28, Section 28 appropriates $114.2 million in general fund appropriations to the Legislative Fund for capital improvement projects for the Legislative Council Bureau. Section 29 authorizes $100 million in general obligation bonds for capital improvement projects for the Legislative Council Bureau and provides that any remaining balance of the allocated amounts must be reverted to the Bond Interest and Redemption Fund on or before September 17, 2027, thereby allowing that 4-year period for construction. Section 30 specifies that the State Board of Finance will issue general obligation bonds for the capital improvement projects for the Legislative Council Bureau when it is deemed appropriate. Subsection 2 allows the controller to advance general fund monies if bonds have not yet been sold to finance the projects for the Legislative Council Bureau. Subsection 3 requires written notification from the Director of the Legislative Council Bureau to the State Controller, the State Treasurer, and the Senate and Assembly Fiscal Analysts if a general fund advance has been approved, and a reconciliation provided to the Legislative Commission demonstrating the general fund and/or highway fund has been reimbursed. Pages 30 through 34, sections 31 through section 32 clarify the supervision and control of certain property related to the Capitol Mall area and legislative parking garage in Carson City, as well as property to be acquired in Las Vegas. And lastly, section 33 on page 34 provides the effective date upon passage and approval of this legislation. Madam Chair, that concludes the presentation of this BDR, and we are ready to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. I believe we have some, and Senator Nguyen, you may go first.
Thank you. Just kind of like was asked in the previous BDR introduction or discussion, what is the total number for the CIP?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Senator Nguyen. For the executive branch CIP projects, and that would be through Section 27, the total is $1.189 billion. And for the legislative projects in Section 28 and 29, that total is $214.2 million.
And so I have a question on page 26, on that section right there that talks about, let's see, was it page, no, page 11, I'm sorry. On page 11, when we're talking about the purchase of the buildings for state offices, that $213,892,000, is that, I mean, that's obviously a combination of, they're not broken up by building type and who they go to, and some of them are executive or governor buildings or other executive agencies, and then some of them are legislative. When you're talking about that, where does that number fall into? Does that that falls into the executive CIP, that 1.189 billion?
Madam Chair, through you to Senator Nguyen, Julie Waller for the record. Yes, that is correct. This is the total for the 18 buildings to be purchased in Las Vegas. And the that will be purchased through the general obligation bonds issued in the executive branch section, Section 6. However, there is language at the back of Section 32 that requires that as soon as practicable, the parcel numbers would be quitclaimed from the state lands to the legislative branch for those parcel numbers to be purchased for the legislative branch.
And I know the executive agency, that's a whole package of those 18 properties. It wasn't
Correct.
one or, it wasn't piecemealed, I guess, out.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions, Senator Severs-Gansert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So there's 213.9 million basically to buy the 18 buildings in Clark County, and then I think there was about 75 or 77 million for tenant improvements. I don't know if that's in another bill or if that's bonded too.
Yes, Madam Chair, through you to Senator Severs-Gansert. That is in the bill, and that is in the general fund section, I believe. So 74, you're correct, it is $74 million, maybe actually part of the bonding.
I believe it's on page 2.
Yes,
About the
correct.
fourth line down, improvements for buildings purchased in Las Vegas.
Okay,
That's
so 213, almost 214 to buy all the buildings, and then 74 million to improve them. So that's, I don't know, I think it's like $290 million. And then, I don't know that I've ever seen this, so usually we have state buildings and they're state buildings, but it looks like in sections 30 to 32, a calling out of the parcels, parcel numbers, but the buildings basically in the 2 lots for the parking garages. And also this building to quit claim deed over specifically to the legislature instead of being held by the state.
Madam Chair, through you to Senator Severs-Gansert. I believe the director of the Legislative Council Bureau is here to answer any questions related to those sections.
Ms. Erdos, would you like to come up and answer those questions?
Thank you.
Switch. Thank you, and welcome, Ms. Erdos, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. So again, the question, so historically, we've had state buildings, but it looks like now we're going to take a subdivision of the state buildings. So the building here, probably the parking garage too, and then potentially the 2 lots for parking garages down south and 3 buildings that were of interest to the legislature and actually change the ownership of them. I just want to make sure I understand that correctly.
Thank you for the question. Brenda Erdos, Legislative Council Bureau. I think the easiest way to answer your question is to, the interest section that's in here, actually, I hadn't seen that, I hadn't worked with it much before, but it makes it clear that, for example, the legislative building is, like this building, the several of the other buildings that are used by the legislature are actually owned by the legislature as well. The parking garage was sort of a funny thing. We own half of it, and then the Supreme Court has the other half, and so and their chiller is in the northwest corner of the basement there, and so we help them with that too. But now that one of our CIP projects is to cover the whole roof of the garage so that it won't fall apart again, and put solar panels up there, in order to do that, we needed to, it needed to be not be half and half, because we're getting into a contract to change that structure. So, and we ran into a problem with that when we were trying to fix it. So anyway, that is just that one half of that garage. I think what happened is that when they built the Supreme Court building, they built the parking garage at the same time, and I'm really not sure why half and half, but that solves that problem. And then and that's the language about the north side of the sidewalk with the north side of the parking garage. As far as I know, again, in 2003, when Governor Gwynn gave us the printing office, he gave us the entire parcel there. I don't know, that was a long time ago. Most of you probably don't remember, but the parking garage, the SPO was just on the on that big lot, and then we built the whole warehouse there. Once we found out that all of the division chiefs were paying out money to rent storage, so we figured that would pay, those payments would pay for a building there, and it's got offices in it too. Those are kind of the bonus. But so that's what's across Stewart Street to the east. So that's also owned by, and again, the Sedway office building was purchased as a bank, and we had the first 2 floors, and then ultimately got the 3rd floor.
Thank you. If I can follow up, because the language in 31 follows out, it talks about the legislative reserves, the supervision and control, both during and between legislative sessions of a variety of things. But then there's when you get to the next section, I believe it calls out parcels for the quitclaim deed.
Are you talking on page 32?
Page 32 and 33. So if you look at page 30, section 31, it starts out with talking about control, supervision and control. And then eventually when you get to section 32, then it calls out parcels for ownership. So I guess I'm trying to distinguish between the two, like ownership versus state buildings, like.
This is the section I was trying to find. Sorry, for the record, Brenda Erdos. NRS 331135 is an old section that was written interestingly, but what we go by is on the state lands. They have a website, I think it's State Lands. It's Charlie Donahue and those guys are really good. Anyway, on their website, they list the legislative building and all these lands as in ownership by the legislature. And so that's, I can't tell you that that's what this says because it's very confusing to me as well, but that's the premise under which we're operating.
Thank you.
Senator Wynn.
Can I just clarify? Basically, we own half that parking garage with the Nevada Supreme Court, and we want to fix it, and they don't want to maintain it, and so we're just transferring it over to us so we can make those changes and make those contracts that we need to do. Is that really what's happening?
Thank you for the question, Brenda Erdos. I think it's much more friendly than that. They wanted us to take care of it. They were part of the destruction, and we haven't worried about who owned what.
I didn't mean to make that seem like it was like some thing. It just seemed like we were in a position to be able to take care of it, and that's why we need this fix so we can take care of it.
We started taking care of half of it, but that doesn't really work. And there are requirements, for example, that we will continue to uphold, which is that the only assigned parking spaces are in the basement. And then other than handicap parking and a couple of emergency vehicles, we don't assign those because they're available, and some of the staff from the Supreme Court parks there too. So it would continue to be public parking, and they would be able to park there. But it's a friendly arrangement, and I think they're very happy that, at least that's what they told me, that they don't have to worry about it anymore.
It's a little bit like when you decide to share mowing lawns between 2 houses, right? One Saturday's you and the other Saturday's someone else. So as long as the other someone else does their part. I have a clarification question. It goes back to when we were talking about the buildings, and I don't know if this is your answer or if Director Robb is answering this, but when we allocate all that 218 billion for the buildings, for the 18 billions, 18 buildings, is that all owned then by the legislature? Is some of it owned by the governor's executive office? I guess I was trying to figure that out now that I heard this situation, how some of it's them and some of it's us. So can you explain that?
I think I can. We came into the deal, I think, you know, a little bit later. Jack Robb had found this and shared it with us, and so then offered us some buildings there because they knew that we were going to move out of Grant Sawyer as well, or we needed to. So they there was a process by which they showed us buildings, and we worked with them, and actually while we were doing that and we're picking buildings, then they added to their inventory to make up for those, and it's been an interesting process. They're pretty amazing at what they find and how they make that work. But so what this bill does is it appropriates but coming in late, we didn't want to interfere with their sale. And it was going to take longer and cost more if you have two sales. There's no reason for that in my mind anyway. So they're buying the whole thing, and then with the state money that's appropriated in here, and then that's what the very last sections are there, that they will quit claim those parcels that Clark County parcels that would be the buildings and the 2 parking lot spaces for that.
Okay. Additional questions from the committee? All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Ms. Waller and Mr. Nichols and Ms. Johnston. I wanted to say Johnson, and I knew that wasn't right. Thank you very much. And with that, we will move to BDRS 1212, 1212. All right. Good evening. Thank you very much. And please go ahead when you're ready.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm James Malone, LCB Fiscal. For the record, with me to my right is J. Marie Mongoba, and she will be assisting with the walkthrough of this BDR to the committee. And then in the audience as well, Nancy Morris, Yuri Yakovlev, and Daniel Miller, who also assisted with preparing this legislation. So the BDR before you is BDR S1212, commonly referred to as the pay bill. And this legislation revises provisions relating to the compensation of state employees. Section 1 sets forth the maximum annual salary amounts for employees in the unclassified service of the state. These amounts include the 1% salary increase approved for fiscal year 2023, but do not include any salary increases that may be approved for the 23-25 biennium. The unclassified positions are listed by agency with the exception of certain personnel in subsection 42 that are unclassified positions available to multiple agencies. Section 2, which begins all the way on page 34 after the listing of the unclassified salaries. This section here provides standard language that is carried over from the prior pay bill. Subsections 1 and 2 allows the Division of Human Resource Management, Department of Administration, to review the duties and responsibilities of a position that may have been omitted from the bill to establish the salary that position and allows for corrections in the bill for any errors determined by the Fiscal Analysis Division with the approval of the Interim Finance Committee. Subsections 3 to 6 include standard provisions regarding persons filling or vacating unclassified positions and allows a position to maintain their salary if their current salary is higher than the salary provided in Section 1. Sections 3 through 12 of this legislation provide salary increases for certain personnel and begin on the bottom of page 35. Section 3 provides that the unclassified positions in Section 1 will receive a 12% salary increase in fiscal year 2024 and a 4% salary increase in fiscal year 2025. And Section 4 appropriates general funds of $7.8 million in fiscal year 2024 and $10.9 million in fiscal year 2025, and highway funds of $385,236 in fiscal year 2024 and $532,870 in fiscal year 2025 for this purpose. Section 5 and 6, which begins on the top of page 37, and Section 6 begins on page 38, provide various salary increases for the classified and non-classified positions in the Executive Department and the Commission on Judicial Discipline, and provides a general fund appropriation of $74.4 million in fiscal year 2024 and $104.7 million in fiscal year 2025, and highway fund appropriations of $14.0 million in fiscal year 2024 and $19.7 million in fiscal year 2025. The following summarizes the salary increases for various groups within Sections 5 and 6. Subsection 2 of Sections 5 and 6. For personnel whose classification has been determined not to be within a bargaining unit, an increase in salary of 12% in fiscal year 2024 and 4% in fiscal year 2025. Subsection 3 of Sections 5 and 6, for personnel whose classification has been determined to be within the following bargaining units: A, labor, maintenance, custodial, and institutional employees; E, professional employees who provide health care; F, employees, other professional employees that provide health care; G, Category 1 peace officers; and I, Category 3 peace officers. An increase of salary of 13% in fiscal year 2024 and 4% in fiscal year 2025. Subsection 4 of Sections 5 and 6, for personnel whose classification has been determined to be within the following bargaining units: B, administrative and clerical employees; C, technical aides to professional employees; D, professional employees who do not provide health care; and J, supervisory employees from all occupational groups. An increase of salary of 12% in fiscal year 2024 and 4% in fiscal year 2025. Subsection 5 of Sections 5 and 6, for personnel whose classification has been determined to be within the following bargaining units: H, Category 2 peace officers; and K, firefighters. An increase of salary of 10% in fiscal year 2024 and 4% in fiscal year 2025. Subsection 6 of Sections 5 and 6 provides a mechanism for any remaining balance of the appropriated funds to carry forward from fiscal year 2024 to fiscal year 2025 without the interim finance committee approval, and the ability for the appropriated funds to be transferred from fiscal year 2025 to fiscal year 2024 with the approval of the IFC. Section 7, which begins on page 40. Subsections 1 to 5 provides various salary increases for the classified positions for the Nevada system of higher education. The salary increases for the classified personnel align with the salary increases for the bargaining units discussed in Sections 5 and 6, and provides a general fund appropriation of $10.1 million in fiscal year 2024 and $14.2 million in fiscal year 2025. Section 7, subsection 6 provides a salary increase not to exceed 12% in fiscal year 2024 and not to exceed 4% in fiscal year 2025 for professional employees within the Nevada system of higher education, and a general fund appropriation of $49.6 million in fiscal year 2024 and $68.0 million in fiscal year 2025. 2025 for that purpose. Subsection 7 of Section 6 is carryover language from the 2021 pay bill that indicates salary increases for NSHE is based on the proportion of appropriations from the state general fund to total revenue within each state-supported budget of the Nevada system of higher education. Subsection 8 of Section 7 provides the authority for BOE, the Board of Examiners, to disperse the funds to NSHE and restricts the usage of those funds to the increases in salaries provided in Section 7. Subsection 9 of Section 7 allows for any remaining balance of appropriated funds to balance forward from fiscal year 2024 to fiscal year 2025. Section 8, which begins on page 42. Fiscal staff performed an analysis of budgets in the executive budget that would rely on reserves to fund the grade increases provided in Sections 3 and 5 of this Act. An estimated $26.1 million over the biennium may be required to keep reserve levels at a 30-day target. Therefore, Section 8 makes a $26.1 million appropriation in fiscal year 2024 with the ability to balance for remaining funds into fiscal year 2025 for budgets within the executive budget that have authorized reserves or retained earnings to assist in the event that they are unable to cover the salary increases with their current revenues or reserves. Section 9, which begins on page 43, similar to the funds provided for budgets who rely on reserves, fiscal staff performed a similar analysis for budgets accounts that do not receive general fund or highway fund appropriations and also do not carry a reserve balance. Fiscal staff estimates $25.9 million over the biennium may be required to assist these budgets with the salary increases if other funding sources could not cover the increase. Accordingly, Section 9 makes a $25.9 million general fund appropriation with the authority to balance forward remaining funds in fiscal year 2025 for this purpose. Section 10, which begins on the bottom of page 43, provides a salary increase of 12% and 4% for the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency and a general fund appropriation of $313,571 in fiscal year 2024 and $430,638 in fiscal year 2025 for that purpose. Section 11 on page 44 provides a salary increase of 12% in fiscal year 2024 and 4% in fiscal year 2025 for personnel of the Legislative Council Bureau and the interim legislative operations, and a general fund appropriation of $5.9 million in fiscal year 2024 and $8.6 million in fiscal year 2025 for that purpose. Section 12 on page 45 provides a salary increase of 12% in fiscal year 2024 and 4% in fiscal year 2025 for personnel of the Judicial Department, and a general fund appropriation of $2.5 million in fiscal year 2024 and $3.6 million in fiscal year 2025 for that purpose. So sections 13 to 20 follow a similar structure to the salary increases provided in sections 3 to 12, as funds are broken out by certain departments and agencies. The two primary differences is that sections 13 to 20 provide an additional increase in salary of 7% in fiscal year 2025 for certain departments, and an additional salary increase not to exceed 7% for NSHE professionals, and is effective on July 1st, 2023, only in the event that Assembly Bill 498 of this session is not enacted by the legislature and not approved by the governor. Assembly Bill 498 provides a cap on an employee's contribution to the public employees' retirement system to half normalized costs. The following will provide the appropriations for each section to carry out this purpose. Section 13 on page 46 provides a general fund appropriation of $5.1 million and a highway fund appropriation of $272,801 for unclassified positions in fiscal year 2025. Section 14, page 47, provides a general fund appropriation of $49 million and a highway fund appropriation of $9.3 million for classified and non-classified positions for certain executive branch departments and the Commission on Judicial Discipline. Section 15, page 48, provides a general fund appropriation of $6.7 million in fiscal year 2025 for classified personnel within the Nevada system of higher education, and a general fund appropriation of $32.4 million in fiscal year 2025 for professional personnel within the Nevada system of higher education. Section 16 on page 49 provides a general fund appropriation of $204,867 in fiscal year 2025 to the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. Section 17 on page 50 provides a general fund appropriation of $3.8 million in fiscal year 2025 to the Legislative Fund. Section 18, page 50, provides a general fund appropriation of $1.6 million to the Judicial Department. Section 19, page 51, provides a general fund appropriation of $7.3 million in fiscal year 2025 for budget accounts within the executive budget that have authorized reserves or retained earnings that may need assistance with the salary increase. Section 20, page 51, provides a general fund appropriation of $7.2 million for budget accounts that do not have general fund or highway fund appropriations or an authorized reserve that may need assistance with the salary increase. And with that, I'll pass it to my colleague, Jay Marie, and she'll walk you through the rest of the bill.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, J. Marie Mangoba from the Fiscal Analysis Division. So continuing in page 52 is section 21. Subsection 1 and 2 appropriates from the State General Fund to the State Board of Examiners $852,632 for fiscal year 24 and $858,313 in fiscal year 25, and appropriate State Highway Fund of $331,030 in fiscal year 24 and $341,623 in fiscal year 25 to effect a one-grade pay increase in the pay plan for certain employees in the classified service. I would note that sections 21 through 25 relates to the 1 to 3 grade pay increases, which was approved by the full committee on May 1st, 2023. Continuing to section 22, this section appropriates from the State General Fund to the State Board of Examiners $18.4 million in fiscal year 24 and $18.9 million in fiscal year 25 to effect a 2-grade pay increase in the pay plan for certain employees in the classified service. Subsection 2 provides State Highway Fund appropriations to the State Board of Examiners of $4.3 million in fiscal year 24 and $4.4 million in fiscal year 25 for the same purpose. Section 23 appropriates State General Fund to the State Board of Examiners $724,991 in fiscal year 24 and $738,876 in fiscal year 25 to effect a 3-grade pay increase in the pay plan for certain employees in the classified service. Continuing on page 55, Section 24 authorizes the Division of Human Resources to make corrections in the event that a position classification was inadvertently omitted or the incorrect pay grade increases was provided to previous sections I mentioned earlier, related to the 1 to 3 grade pay increases, with a requirement to submit a report to the Interim Finance Committee. Section 25 is the standard diversion language for the funding provided for the 1 to 3 grade pay increases. This is similar language for all the reversion languages. Continuing on page 56, Section 26 to 30 relates to the bonuses. And starting with Section 26, it appropriates from the State General Fund to the Office of Finance in the Office of the Governor $20.7 million in each year of the 2023-25 biennium for the payment of retention incentives or bonuses of $250 per quarter for employees in the state classified, unclassified, and non-classified service, except for persons whose positions are temporary, intermittent, or seasonal, or are positions for which there is a critical labor shortage. Continuing on page 57, Section 27 appropriates from the State General Fund to the Legislative Fund $488,000 in each fiscal year of the 2023-25 biennium for retention incentives or bonuses for employee in the legislative department, except similar requirement, the person cannot be eligible if you are temporary, intermittent, or seasonal. Continuing on page 58, Section 28 appropriates from the State General Fund to the Public Employees Retirement System, or PERS, $84,000 in each year of the 2023-25 biennium for these bonuses for employee of the PERS, except for temporary, intermittent, or seasonal, or a position for which there is critical labor shortage. Continuing on page 59, Section 29, this section appropriates from the State General Fund to the Nevada System of Higher Education the sum of $3.5 million in each year of the 2023-25 biennium for the payment of retention incentives or bonuses for professional positions at NSHE. Page 60, Section 30 appropriates from the State General Fund to the Judicial Department staff salaries budget account $192,000 in fiscal year 24 and $200,000 in fiscal year 25 for the bonuses. Section 31 on page 61 amends NRS 218F.510. This is just a cleanup language to change the ex officio legislative fiscal officer from the chief of the administrative division to the chief of financial officer to commensurate with the duties of the position. Moving on to page 63, Section 32 amends Chapter 284 of the statute to add a new section to include a plan to encourage continuity of service, commonly known as longevity. This would provide for an employee, including professional employees at NSHE, with 8 years of continuous state service with semi-annual payment of $100, with an annual increase of $25 in the semi-annual payment for each year of the employee's 9th through 14th years of continuous service, an annual increase of $50 for each year of the employee's 15th through 24th years of continuous service, and an annual increase of $75 for each additional year of continuous service after 24 years, up to a maximum payment of 30 years of continuous state service. Section 33 on page 64 amends NRS 284.3775. This is existing language in statute. The only change in this section is in sub 3 where they added the word longevity. So moving on to page 67, section 34. This amends statutes related to the salaries of executive officers at the Public Employees Retirement System, or PERS. This is a cleanup language related to section 44, which I will discuss later in this presentation. Moving on to page 68, section 35. It's a similar section to the previous section I mentioned, and is related to section 44. This is also a cleanup language for salaries, the salary of the executive officer of the Public Employees Benefit Program, or PEB. Section 36 on page 69 relates to the funding for longevity, starting with subsection 1. This appropriates from the State General Fund to the State Board of Examiners $2.6 million in fiscal year 24 and $3.0 million in fiscal year 25 for longevity payments for classified, unclassified, and non-classified employees in the state. Subsection 2 is for a state highway fund appropriations of $1.3 million in fiscal year 24 and $1.5 million in fiscal year 25 for longevity payments for the classified, unclassified, and non-classified employees of the state. Subsection 3 appropriates from the State General Fund to the State Board of Examiners $2.6 million in fiscal year 24 and $2.9 million in fiscal year 25 for classified and professional employees of the Nevada System of Higher Education. Subsection 4 appropriates from the State General Fund to the State Board of Examiners $692,361 in fiscal year 24 for eligible employees whose positions are funded from budget accounts that have authorized reserves and retained earnings. Subsection 5 appropriates from the State General Fund to the State Board of Examiners $687,311 in fiscal year '24 for employees whose positions are funded from budget accounts that do not have authorized reserves or retained earnings and do not receive any appropriations from the State General Fund or the State Highway Fund. Subsection 6 appropriates from the State General Fund to the Judicial Department staff salaries budget account $87,808 in fiscal year '24 and $98,711 in fiscal year '25. Subsection 7 appropriates from the State General Fund to the Legislative Fund $154,248 for fiscal year '24 and $173,606 in fiscal year '25 for the longevity payment. Subsections 8 and 9 on page 71 are just standard reversion language that's carryover from standard reversion language and separated out for those funding that can carry forward to from fiscal year '24 to '25 and those that reverts every fiscal year. Section 37 on page 71 is a standard language also that governs the distribution of monies by the State Board of Examiners. Section 38 is also a standard reversion language requiring funds to revert to the general fund at the end of fiscal year '25. Section 39 is a standard language that governs the distribution of monies from the State Board of Examiners related to the additional 7% salary increase and this was carved out from the previous sections because this is contingent upon AB 498. Section 40 is also a standard reversion language for the additional 7% salary increase in fiscal year '25. Continuing on page 74, Section 41 is a carryover language from the 2021 pay bill related to the plans for on-call pay for the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Corrections for physician or pharmacist positions. Section 42 on page 74 is also a carryover language from the 2021 pay bill related to plans for credential pay for the Gaming Control Board. Next page, on page 75, is Section 43. This is a standard language to align position name changes enacted by the legislature this session through other bills with the position names on the pay bill. Section 44, as I indicated previously in sections 34 and 35, Section 44 repeals NRS 281.123, which requires the salary of a person employed by the state not to exceed 95% of the salary of the governor. Section 45 provides the effective dates of certain sections of the bill, and that concludes our presentation of the pay bill. We'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. All right, with that, Senator Wynn.
So is it my understanding that for fiscal year 2024 from the general fund, this totals up to be about $254.4 million? And I can pretend like
That is correct.
I can pretend like I added that up, but I did not. But I just wanted to confirm. And then it's an additional $375.4 million for fiscal year '25. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then can you give me the distributions for the biennium for the highway fund as well?
Yes, James Malone for the record. Total highway funds included in the pay bill for fiscal year 2024 is $20.3 million, and for fiscal year 2025 is $36.1 million for a total biennium of $56.4 million.
Thank you. And these numbers that are contained in this actually include those COLAs. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, but it doesn't include any of those potential PERS changes that I think are an assembly bill that's pending?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Are you hungry? Are you? All right, seeing no questions, thank you very much. And we are going to take a little break because we need to do some switcheroo with the assembly. So,
Folks are here, sorry. But we could take a
all right, we are going to take a break, and it is 6:20. So let's say maybe around 6:50. All right, and stay tuned. We'll be back. We're in recess. All right, we will come back into order for all of those that are interested. The next BDR that we will hear is 1207, and I will let Mr. Thorley give us a little background, and then we'll hear from staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wayne Thorley for the record, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. BDR S1207 authorizes expenditures by agencies of the state government for the 2023-25 biennium. It is commonly referred to as the Authorizations Act. Ms. Ellsworth, Mr. English, and Mr. Luna are here from LCB Fiscal to present the BDR to the committee.
Go ahead when you're ready.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Kimber Ellsworth, Fiscal Analysis Division for the record. As Mr. Thorley stated, I'm presenting the BDR for the 2023 Authorizations Act. And if it's okay with the chair, I'll go through the whole bill and then take questions at the end. This bill reflects all the decisions of the money committees that would authorizes the non-general fund and non-highway funds. The Authorizations Act represents authority for agencies to collect and expend monies, including federal funds, gifts, grants, interagency transfers, service fees, and other funds. Additionally, due to specific statutory language for these agencies, the Act includes authority for the Gaming Control Board and the Gaming Commission to expend general fund over the 2023 to 25 biennium. Similarly, the bill includes authority for the Department of Transportation to expend highway fund over the 2023 to 25 biennium. Section 1 of the bill authorizes expenditure of sums not appropriated from the general fund or highway fund by agency for fiscal years 24 and fiscal years 25. The NDOT administration total includes all funding, highway fund appropriations plus authorizations. The gaming accounts authorizations go in section 1 of the bill, and the appropriations go in sections 3 and 4, which I will cover shortly. There are 4 education accounts that are excluded from this bill, as they are included in the K through 12 education bill. Those are the Education Stabilization Account, the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan Account, Teach Nevada Scholarship Program, and the Account for State Special Education Services. Section 2 is carryover language from last session, and this begins on page 25. Per the Master Settlement Agreement for Tobacco Settlement Funds, compliance and enforcement functions are required through the AG's office, and audit functions were added in 2013 for taxation. These 2 disbursements are made before any other disbursements of tobacco funds. Any balance not spent by these 2 agencies will revert 40% to the Millennium Scholarship Trust Fund and 60% to the Healthy Nevada Fund. Any unspent Healthy Nevada Fund monies from the main Section 1 authorizations revert to the Healthy Nevada Fund. Subsection 1 of Section 2 authorizes expenditure of tobacco settlement funds to support the tobacco enforcement operations of the Attorney General Special Litigation Account. Subsection 2 requires the state controller disperse the amount authorized in its entirety before other disbursements are made. And subsection 3, at the bottom of page 25, requires any remaining balance of the funds authorized for expenditure be dispersed 40% to the Millennium Scholarship Trust Fund and 60% to the Fund for Healthy Nevada. Section 3 is on page 26. This is carryover language from last biennium. This contains the general fund appropriations for the Gaming Control Board that I mentioned previously. Section 4 on page 27 contains the general fund appropriations for the Gaming Commission. Section 5 is carryover language as well. This begins on page 27. All authorizations included in sections 1 to 4 of this act, except for by the legislative department, judicial agencies, the Public Employees Retirement System, and the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, must be expended in accordance with the State Budget Act. This means that LCB, judicial, PERS, and TRPA don't have to go to the Interim Finance Committee for the work program changes. Section 6 is on page 28. This is also carryover language from last biennium. The chief of the budget division may augment or reduce any authorization through the work program process, except for LCB budgets or for Section 7 violations. The director of the LCB may, with the approval of the Legislative Commission, augment the authorization for the legislative fund. Section 7 begins on page 28. The first paragraph is carryover language from last biennium. The and there is additional language that's been added. The general fund or highway fund appropriation must be decreased to the extent that the other revenue sources exceed their authorizations. And the first line in Section 7 has several sections that are exempted from this. Section 8 relates to NSHE for the use of their tuition and registration fees. Section 9, subpart 3, relates to the public defender receiving additional contributions from counties. Section 11 relates to the Division of Forestry for funds related to emergency response vehicle repair. Section 13 relates to the Division of Forestry for the funds to support their incident business unit, and Section 14 relates to the Division of Forestry Special Reserves. Section 15 relates to WICHE Healthcare Access Program slots. Section 17 relates to DCFS, Clark County, and Washoe County for Child Welfare Services. Section 18 relates to NSHE to allow for funds to be carried forward. Section 26 and 27 are new, and we will cover all of these sections as I walk through the bill. 26 relates to the DCFS Victims of Crime, and Section 27 relates to the Administrative Office of the Courts. The new language in Section 7 begins in subsection 1B, and this adds that upon recommendation of the governor, the interim finance committee may grant a request for an exemption from the requirements of this section for all or a portion of the excess money. And subsection 2 adds that the IFC shall consider, among other things, the reason provided for the exemption, including the current need for the excess money and the intent of the legislature in approving the budget for the current biennium. Section 8 begins on page 29, and this is carryover language from last biennium. Subsection 1 enables NSHE to expend fees and tuition from the registration of resident or non-resident students in the designated amounts for both fiscal years. Subsection 2 is on page 30, and this allows NSHE to expend any additional registration fees and non-resident tuition fees beyond the budgeted enrollments and any additional fees resulting from fee increases. It also requires that NSHE report to the IFC every 6 months about the additional fees and the associated expenditures. Subsection 3 of Section 8 requires any increases in non-general fund revenues not reduce the general fund appropriation. So this is one of the Section 7 exemptions that I mentioned previously. Section 9 is on page 31. This is also carryover language from last biennium. Subsection 1 specifies the allocation of county assessments for the services of the public defender. Subsection 2 provides that any salary benefit or COLA increases for employees of the public defender's office may be assessed and collected from the counties for their pro rata share. And subsection 3 provides that the public defender may accept any additional contributions from the counties with IFC approval to augment services. And this is another Section 7 exemption. Section 10 is on page 32. This is also carryover language from last biennium. The tax on motor vehicle fuel used in watercraft for recreational purposes shall be allocated equally between wildlife and state parks. Wildlife regulates boating and fishing, and state parks provides the water recreation opportunities. Section 11, also on page 32, is also carryover language from last biennium. This allows money authorized for the Division of Forestry, forestry conservation camps, and the fire suppression budgets for the costs for the repair and maintenance of firefighting and emergency response vehicles to be expended for that purpose. This is another piece that's called out in Section 7. The Forest Fire Suppression account receives and sends fire billings to cover the cost of personnel and equipment used with other fire agencies, including the feds. And the Forestry Administration and Conservation Camps budgets receive a portion of that funding for vehicle repair costs. Section 12 is new language. This is also on page 32. This requires that at least 50% of the coronavirus fiscal recovery funds balance forward from fiscal year 2023 and authorized for expenditure for fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025 be advanced from the COVID-19 relief program's budget for expenditure to the respective state agency or organization for which the allocation has been approved. Section 13 is carryover language from last biennium. This allows money authorized for the Division of Forestry and Forest Fire Suppression budgets for support of the incident business unit to be expended for that purpose. This is another piece called out in Section 7, due to the reimbursements that are received in the fire suppression account, some of that funding is used to support the incident business or central reporting unit in the Division of Forestry to fund those personnel costs. Section 14 is also carryover language from last biennium. This relates to the forest fire suppression account again. This authorizes special reserves in that budget for the support of the incident business unit personnel costs and up to $425,000 for the repair and maintenance of firefighting and emergency response vehicles. And again, this is a piece that's called out in Section 7. The purpose of this is to ensure that funding is available in years when fire billing revenue is insufficient to cover these costs. Section 15 is also carryover language from last biennium. The Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, and I'm sorry, we're on page 34 for Section 15, or WICHE, the loan and stipend budget may balance forward to the subsequent fiscal year for expenditure on healthcare access program slots, any unobligated loan, stipend, and interest repayment revenues, which were received after May 15th of each fiscal year. This is another piece called out in Section 7 for cash flow purposes. Section 16, again, is carryover language. This is on page 34 as well. This authorizes the Office of the Military to carry forward the unexpended balance in the Emergency Operations Center account. Section 17 is carryover language at the bottom of page 34. This authorizes the DHHS Division of Child and Family Services, Clark County and Washoe County to utilize any additional monies received to augment child welfare services with the approval of the Interim Finance Committee. This is another Section 7 exemption. Section 18 is on page 35. This is also carryover language from last biennium. This authorizes the Nevada System of Higher Education to carry forward any unexpended money authorized for expenditure in Section 8, including registration fees and non-resident tuition, to the next fiscal year. And this is another piece that was called out in Section 7. Section 19 is carryover language from last biennium. This is also on page 35. This waives the Interim Finance Committee approval requirement for any work program revision requests associated with the bond repayment costs of the bonds from the State Treasurer's Municipal Bond Bank Revenue or Municipal Bond Bank Debt Services budgets. Section 20 at the bottom of page 35 is also carryover language. This requires revenue from the sale of any retired vehicle that was purchased with state general funds be deposited in the state general fund. Section 21, also at the bottom of page 35, is carryover language from last biennium. This requires the Public Employees Benefits Program comply with the work program provisions of NRS 353.220 when projecting funding available in excess of projected expenditures, and requires the program to request approval of the Interim Finance Committee upon the recommendation of the governor to expend or otherwise obligate reserves. Section 22 is on page 36. This is new language that authorizes the use of interest earnings on amounts in the Consolidated Bond Interest and Redemption Fund to be transferred to the Nevada Statewide Infrastructure Bank budget account for personnel and operating costs. Section 23 at the bottom of page 36 is carryover language from last biennium. This requires Nevada Medicaid and the Nevada Checkup Program to utilize authorized funds to continue the current service delivery model for prescription drugs. Section 24 is new language. This begins on page 37. This authorizes the Department of Transportation to utilize specified amounts from the State Highway Fund for the continuing costs of the replacement of the Nevada Shared Radio System. And in Section 29, you'll see that this amount is authorized only if the associated one-shot bill is not approved. Section 25 is also new language. This requires any fee revenues balanced forward be expended before any new fee revenues and general fund appropriations may be expended for the Department of Public Safety, Central Repository for Nevada Records of Criminal History. Section 26 is also new language. This authorizes the Division of Child and Family Services to accept additional money to support the Victims of Crime budget account. And you may recall this is another Section 7 exemption. Section 27, also on page 37, is another new section. This authorizes the Administrative Office of the Courts to utilize any money as a result of a settlement agreement related to ongoing litigation pertaining to the implementation of a statewide trial court case management system, to use it for the implementation of a statewide trial court case management system. And this is the last piece that's called out in the Section 7 exemption, in that first line in Section 7. Section 28 is on page 38. This is carryover language from last biennium. If the name or duties of an officer or agency have been changed or transferred pursuant to another act, then any reference to that officer or agency shall be deemed to refer to the officer or agency the name or duties of which have been changed or transferred by the other act. And Section 29 at the end of page 38 is the effective dates for this bill. Sections 28 and 29 are effective upon passage and approval. Sections 1 to 27, except for 24, are effective on July 1st, 2023. And Section 24 is effective on July 1st, 2023, only if Assembly Bill 477, which contains the one-shot funding for the NDOT shared radio system, is not passed and approved. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. All right, questions, committee? Senator Titus, would you
Thank you.
like to ask that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought maybe the good Senator Wynn was going to ask it again, but if you could you give me a total of what the general fund is plus the federal dollars? You know, two separate, because there's COVID monies here and here, then there's general funds in here. Could you break down totals for me, please?
Off the top of my notes, I can give you the grand total to start with, and I might need Wayne to assist with the COVID breakdown. But so over the biennium, the total funding authorized in this bill is $31.71 billion. In fiscal year 2024, it's $17.01 billion. In fiscal year 2025, it's $14.7 billion. And if you give us a few minutes, we might be able to give you a little more detail on the breakdown.
Right, because certainly there's a large portion of this are federal funds.
Correct.
Wayne Thorley for the record, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. Regarding the COVID-19 funding, most of that shows up as interagency transfers in the budget in the upcoming biennium and not as federal funds because it was all brought in as one lump sum, $2.7 billion, shortly after the 2021 legislature adjourned. At that point, it showed up as federal funds coming into the budget, but now as it's distributed out to agencies, it'll show up as interagency transfers and not federal funds. So for the budget as approved coming out of the money committees, federal funds were approved of, and again, this doesn't include the COVID-19 or the ARPA funds because those are under interagency transfers. So about 7.8 billion in FY24 and 6.9 billion in FY25. The interagency transfer amount, and again, a lot of this is the ARPA funds, but there are other dollars included in interagency transfers. That's 3.5 billion in FY24 and right at 3 billion for FY25.
So adding up the, and thank you for that. So what's the actual general fund dollars, though?
Wayne Thorley again, for the record, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. So general fund dollars, this is inclusive of the funding in the Appropriations Act, as well as general fund in the State Education Fund for K-12 education. Does not include one-shot appropriations requested by the governor. It's just over $5 billion in FY24 and $5.6 billion in FY25. all in, hold on. So including all sources of funds, again, not counting one-shot appropriations, and inclusive of interagency transfers. If I can use, nope, sorry, I'm trying to sum things up on the fly. Hold on.
While you're doing that, I would just make a comment, and I know you won't have those numbers tonight, and in the interest of time, it would be nice to see a comparison, as this is really an unprecedented amount of federal funds, not only general funds, but also federal funds, and I would love to see at some point a comparison of the 23, 24 feds, but obviously that's not where we are tonight, but it would be nice to have that.
Yes, fiscal staff can certainly put that together for you, Senator Titus. So for the entire state budget, as approved by the money committees, inclusive of funding, general fund and non-general fund for sources in the state education fund, we are looking at $27.4 billion in FY24, and then $25.6 billion in FY25.
Okay, additional questions from the committee on this particular item? All right, then with that, thank you very much, and thank you for your time. And we will move on to BDR 1208. And Miss Madison. And who gets to read tonight? Oh, I see how this is going. Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Adam Drost with the LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. Today I'm joined by my colleagues Liliana Camacho-Polco, as well as Madison Ryan, and together we comprise the K-12 team for the LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. Tonight, as you mentioned, we're going to walk through BDR S1208, which ensures sufficient funding for K-12 education for the 2023-25 biennium. This will become the K-12 education funding bill, which is one of the budget implementation bills. This bill reflects the closing decisions of the money committees related to the 7 K-12 budgets, which are not included in the Appropriations Act or the Authorizations Act and are only included in the K-12 funding bill. We plan on covering the entire bill, and then we will respond to any questions at the end of our presentation after we've walked through the bill. Starting on page 1 is section 1, and this indicates the total public support for school districts, charter schools, and university schools for profoundly gifted pupils, which is the Davidson Academy on the University of Nevada, Reno campus, for FY 2024 is an estimated average of $12,863 per pupil. On page 2 is section 2, and this provides the total public support for school districts, charter schools, and university schools for profoundly gifted pupils for FY 2025 at an estimated average of $13,368 per pupil. I would note this includes the total public support for public schools in the state, which includes the pupil-centered funding plan funding, as well as categorical funding and federal funding provided through the Department of Education. This amount does exclude any money provided by the federal government directly to a public school or school district, or otherwise provided on a one-time basis in response to an emergency. In other words, the COVID-19 funding budget that's provided to the Department of Education. Would note that we also prepared a table and a bar chart that all of you should have available to you, and this provides the legislatively approved funding for the current 21-23 biennium, the governor's recommended funding for the upcoming biennium, as well as the funding approved by the money committees for the upcoming biennium. I would note the bar chart on the bottom provides the pupil-centered funding plan adjusted base funding in blue, the pupil-centered funding plan tiers, which includes the food services, transportation, and local special education funding in gray, as well as the weighted funding in yellow from the pupil-centered funding plan, the state categorical funding in red, and the federal funding provided in purple. My colleague Liliana Camacho Poco will now cover the other sections related to the pupil-centered funding plan included in the bill.
Thank you. Liliana Camacho Poco, Fiscal Analysis Division for the record. I will begin on page 2, section 3. And subsection 1 includes general fund appropriations for the pupil-centered funding plan account of $1.1 billion in fiscal year 2024 and $1.5 billion in fiscal year 2025. Subsection 2 includes legislative declaration that the amount appropriated is sufficient to fund the operation of K through 12 education. Subsection 3 and 4 includes standard language requiring the general fund appropriations to be subject to the requirements of the State Budget Act. And it also allows general fund appropriations to be transferred between fiscal years with approval of the governor upon the recommendation of the director of the governor's finance office, but without IFC approval. Subsection 4 begins on page 3 and indicates authorizations of $4.4 billion in fiscal year 2024 in subsection 1, and subsection 2 indicates authorizations of $4.3 billion in fiscal year 2025. These amounts reflect the funding provided by non-general fund sources, including property tax, local school support tax, governmental services tax, and room tax. Subsection 3 includes standard language requiring the authorizations to be subject to the requirements of the State Budget Act. The total amount of funding provided in sections 3 of general fund and section 4 of authorizations is $5.5 billion in fiscal year 2024 and $5.7 billion in fiscal year 2025. Section 5 begins on page 4. And it begins the funding of the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan in fiscal year 2024, which is based on the funding tiers established in Chapter 387 of NRS. Subsection 1 provides a transfer of funding for food services, which is $1.6 million total, and transportation costs of $193.2 million total for each school district. Subsection 2 provides the transfers of local funding for special education costs for each school district and all charter schools totaling $483.8 million in fiscal year 2024. Subsection 3 on page 6 provides the statewide base per pupil funding amount of $8,966 in fiscal year 2024. Subsection 4, beginning on page 6 and through page 7, provides the adjusted base per pupil funding amount in fiscal year 2024 for each school district. Amounts include the statewide base per pupil funding, as well as Nevada Cost of Education Index and attendance area adjustments for each school district on the pupil-centered funding plan, or the calculated per pupil amount for those school districts receiving the fiscal year 2020 baseline amount. Subsection 5 provides the statewide base per pupil funding amount of $8,966 that would be provided to pupils enrolled full-time in a program of distance education in fiscal year 2024 for each charter school or university school for profoundly gifted pupils, as virtual charter schools only receive the statewide base per pupil funding amount per NRS 387.1214. Subsection 5 also provides the individual adjusted base per pupil amounts that would be provided to charter schools operating in each county, excluding attendance area adjustments, and the statewide base per pupil amount times the Nevada Cost of Education Index for each county. The Money Committee is approved using a Nevada Cost of Education Index of 1.0 for all counties, so the statewide base per pupil amount is reflected for each county. Subsection 6, starting on page 8, provides the final adjusted base per pupil funding that would be provided for each charter school currently operating in the 6 counties that have charter schools, inclusive of the attendance area adjustments for those charter schools. As illustrated, these amounts vary based on the adjusted base amount as well as the attendance area adjustments calculated for each area. Subsection 7 on page 9 provides the calculated weights for English learners of 0.45 at-risk pupils of 0.35, and gifted and talented pupils of 0.12. Subsection 8, at the bottom of page 9, provides the weighted funding that would be provided to individual school districts, charter schools combined, and the university schools for profoundly gifted pupils in fiscal year 2024. The total for English learners is $212.5 million, total for at-risk funding of $198.7 million, and total gifted and talented funding of $8.0 million. Subsection 9 at the top of page 11 details the school districts that would receive the fiscal year 2020 baseline amounts under the pupil-centered funding plan in fiscal year 2024. Those school districts are Esmeralda, Eureka, and Story County. The subsection further clarifies that these school districts may reapportion base and weight funding to provide a reasonably equal educational opportunity for its pupils. Subsection 10 defines the various areas charter schools operate in Washoe County. Subsection 6, beginning on page 11, is similar to Section 5 and begins the pupil-centered funding plan in fiscal year 2025 based on the funding tiers established in Chapter 387 of NRS. Subsection 1 provides the transfers of funding for food services for a total of $1.6 million and transportation costs for a total of $193.2 million for each school district. Subsection 2 provides transfers of local funding for special education costs for each school district and all charter schools totaling $483.9 million in fiscal year 2025. Subsection 3 on page 13 provides a statewide base per pupil funding of $9,414 in fiscal year 2025. Subsection 4 provides the adjusted base per pupil funding amount in fiscal year 2025 for each school district. Amounts include the base per pupil funding, as well as the Nevada Cost of Education Index and attendance area adjustments for each school district on the pupil-centered funding plan, or the calculated per pupil amount for those school districts receiving the fiscal year 2020 baseline amount. Subsection 5 provides a statewide base per pupil funding amount of $9,414 that would be provided to pupils enrolled full-time in a program of distance education in fiscal year 2025 for each charter school or university school for profoundly gifted pupils, as virtual charter schools only receive the statewide base per pupil funding amount per NRS 387.1214. Subsection 5 on page 14 also provides the individual adjusted base per pupil amounts that would be provided to charter schools operating in each county, excluding the attendance area adjustments, which is the base per pupil amount times the Nevada Cost of Education Index for each county. The Money Committee is approved using a Nevada Cost of Education Index of 1.0 for all counties, so the statewide base per pupil amount is reflected for each county. Subsection 6 on the bottom of page 15 provides the final adjusted base per pupil funding that would be provided for each charter school currently operating in the 6 counties that have charter schools, inclusive of the attendance area adjustments for those charter schools. As illustrated, these amounts vary based on the adjusted base amounts as well as the attendance area adjustments calculated for each area. Subsection 7, beginning on page 16, provides the calculated weights for English learners of 0.45, at-risk pupils of 0.35, and gifted and talented pupils of 0.12. Subsection 8 begins on the bottom of page 16 also and provides the weighted funding that would be provided in fiscal year 2025 to individual school districts, charter schools combined, and the university school for profoundly gifted pupils. The total for English learners is $223.2 million. Total for at-risk funding is $208.6 million. And total for gifted and talented funding is $8.4 million. Subsection 9 details the school districts that would receive fiscal year 2020 baseline amounts under the pupil-centered funding plan in fiscal year 2025, and those include Esmeralda, Eureka, and Story County school districts. This section further clarifies that these school districts may reapportion base and weight funding to provide a reasonably equal educational opportunity for its pupils. Subsection 10 defines the various areas charter schools operate in Washoe County. And Ms. Ryan will present the remainder of the BDR. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Madison Ryan, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division for the record. I will be walking through the remaining sections of the BDR, which includes sections 7 through 17. So section 7 begins on page 18 of the BDR, and subsection 1 provides general fund appropriations of $245.7 million in fiscal year 2024 and $252.8 million in fiscal year 2025 for the account for state special education services. Subsection 2 provides authorizations of $2 million in each year of the 2023-25 biennium in the account for state special education services. This is balance forward funding utilized to fund extraordinary special education expenditures. And moving to page 19, subsections 3 and 4 provides the transfer of $244.2 million in fiscal year 2024 and $251.3 million in fiscal year 2025 for state special education funding provided to school districts, charter schools, and university schools for profoundly gifted pupils, largely based on their special education enrollment as a multiplier. As a reminder, state special education funding is limited to no more than 13% of total enrollment for each school district and charter school. Subsections 5 and 6 provides the transfer of $1.5 million in both fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025 for state special education funding provided to school districts and charter schools with special education enrollment that exceeds the 13% funding cap. Subsections 7 and 8, which are outlined at the bottom of page 19 and the top of page 20, provides the transfer of $2 million that is utilized to fund extraordinary special education expenditures that are not ordinarily present in the typical special education service and delivery system at a public school. Subsection 9 requires the remaining general fund appropriations to revert at the end of each fiscal year. Section 8 begins on page 20. And subsection 1 provides general fund appropriations of $44.3 million in both fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025 for the other state education programs account. Subsection 2 is standard language requiring the general fund appropriations to be subject to the requirements of the State Budget Act. And subsection 3 provides the transfer of $19.3 million in both fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025 from the other state education programs account for the adult high school diploma program. Moving to page 21, subsection 4 includes an annual reporting requirement for the adult high school diploma program, and subsection 5 requires any remaining funding from fiscal year 2024 for the adult high school diploma program to be balanced forward and added to the fiscal year 2025 funding, and also requires any remaining funding at the end of fiscal year 2025 to revert to the general fund. Subsection 6 provides that money appropriated as outlined in this section is available for both fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025 and may be transferred from year to year with interim finance committee approval. And paragraph A of subsection 6 begins at the top of page 22, and this provides the transfer of $3.9 million in both fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025 from the other state education programs account for the Jobs for Nevada's Graduates program. Paragraph B provides the transfer of $300,000 in both fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025 from the other state education programs account to the Department of Education for transfer to the Leadership Institute of Nevada for the implementation and operation of education leadership training programs, and expenditure of these amounts is contingent upon a one-to-one match from sources other than the state appropriation. Subsection 7 of the total transferred in each fiscal year for the Jobs for Nevada's graduates, $314,293 is contingent upon a one-to-one match from non-general fund sources. Subsection 8 includes an annual reporting requirement to the Interim Finance Committee for the Education Leadership Training Program. In moving to page 23, subsection 9 requires the remaining general fund appropriations for the Jobs for Nevada's Graduates program and the Leadership Institute of Nevada to revert to the general fund at the end of fiscal year 2025. In subsections 10 and 11 provides the transfer of $13.5 million in both fiscal year 2024 and 2025 from the other state education programs account for the award of grants for the Career and Technical Education program. And any unused funding must revert to the general fund at the end of each fiscal year. In moving to page 24, subsections 12 and 13 provides the transfer of $462,725 in both fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025 from the other state education programs account for the award of grants to support public broadcasting in the state, and any unused funding must revert to the general fund at the end of each fiscal year. In subsections 14 and 15 provides that $6.8 million in both fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025 from the other state education programs account be used by the Department of Education for the Incentivizing Pathways to Teaching grant program, and any unused funding must revert to the general fund at the end of fiscal year 2025. Section 9 is on page 25. In subsection 1 provides general fund appropriations of $7.7 million in both fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025 for the Professional Development Programs account. Subsection 2 is standard language requiring the general fund appropriations to be subject to the requirements of the State Budget Act. Section 10 begins on page 25 as well, and subsections 1 and 2 provides the transfer of $7.6 million in both fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025 from the Professional Development Programs account to the Department of Education for transfer to the school districts that serve as the fiscal agents. As identified in this subsection, the following transfers would occur in both fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025. To the Clark County School District, $4 million, to the Elko County School District, $1.3 million, and to the Washoe County School District, $2.3 million. And moving to page 26, subsection 3, requires any remaining funding from fiscal year 2024 for the professional development programs to be balanced forward and added to the fiscal year 2025 funding, and also requires any remaining funding at the end of fiscal year 2025 to revert to the general fund. Section 11 begins on page 26. In subsections 1 and 2 provides the transfer of $100,000 in both fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025 from the Professional Development Programs account to the Department of Education for transfer to the Statewide Council for the coordination of the regional training programs to provide additional training opportunities for education administrators in Nevada. Subsection 3 requires any remaining funding from fiscal year 2024 for the council to be balanced forward and added to the fiscal year 2025 funding, and also requires any remaining funding at the end of fiscal year 2025 to revert to the general fund. Section 12 begins on page 27, and subsection 1 provides general fund appropriations of $560,886 in both fiscal year 2024 and 2025 for the 1/5 retirement credit purchase program account. And subsection 2 allows the funding to be transferred between fiscal years with interim finance committee approval. And section 13 begins on page 28, and subsection 1 provides general fund appropriations of $2.4 million in both fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025 for the Teach Nevada Scholarship Program account. Subsection 2 again is standard language requiring the general fund appropriations to be subject to the requirements of the State Budget Act. And subsections 3 and 4 provides authorizations of $3.8 million in fiscal year 2024 and $4 million in fiscal year 2025, which is largely balanced forward funding in the Teach Nevada Scholarship Program account. Section 14 is on page 29, and subsection 1 provides general fund appropriations of $3.2 million in both fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2025 to the Interim Finance Committee for the Teach Nevada Scholarship Program. Subsection 2 allows the Interim Finance Committee to allocate funding to the Department of Education from the funding identified in subsection 1 of section 14 from the contingency account of the Interim Finance Committee to increase funding for the Teach Nevada Scholarship Program upon presentation of a status report on the Teach Nevada Scholarship Program by the Department of Education. And subsection 3 requires the remaining general fund appropriations to revert at the end of each fiscal year. And section 15 begins on page 29 as well. And subsection 1 provides authorizations of $851.7 million in fiscal year 2024 in the Education Stabilization Account. And subsection 2 on page 30 provides authorizations of $878.9 million in fiscal year 2025 in the Education Stabilization Account. And subsection 3 is standard language requiring the authorizations to be subject to the requirements of the State Budget Act. And section 16, which is also on page 30 of the document, amends NRS 387-1211 to define at-risk pupil as a pupil who is within The quintile of pupils determined to be most in need of additional services and assistance to graduate based on one or more measures prescribed by the State Board, which may include without limitation consideration of whether a pupil is economically disadvantaged, is at risk of dropping out of high school, or fails to meet minimum standards of academic proficiency. And finally, Section 17 makes this act become effective on July 1, 2023. And Madam Chair, that completes our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that information. Committee, do we have any questions? Senator Wynn.
I will ask this because I know that there are several people that are interested. So it's for all of the general fund, federal funds, and other funding sources for this particular BDR. It is about $6.062 billion in fiscal year 24 and $6.306 billion in fiscal year 25. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, through you to Senator Wynn. Actually, the federal funding that's included in this chart is actually included in the Authorizations Act that you heard earlier.
Okay.
So that is not included in this bill. If I look at the total funding from the 7 budgets that are reflected in the K-12 bill, I come up with about $6.7 billion in year 1, FY24, and $6.9 billion in year 2, FY25. However, I would note that includes about $880 million from the Education Stabilization Account that is not really an expenditure, it's just a balance forward K-12 rainy day fund. So backing that out, it's about $5.8 billion in FY 2024 and $6.1 billion in year 2, FY 25. And just as Ms. Ryan mentioned, there is also a $3.2 million appropriation in each year of the biennium included in this bill to the IFC contingency account, which is not reflected in those totals.
All right. Senator Harris, did you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for walking us through that. I want to make sure I'm reading your handy-dandy chart correctly. So it looks like the legislatively approved budget in fiscal year 24 is almost $400 additional dollars per child as opposed to the GovRec. And in fiscal year 25, we're looking at approximately $500 additional dollars per child. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, through you to Senator Harris, that is correct. Looking at the governor, comparing the money committees approved for FY24 compared to governor's recommended for FY24, I calculate about a $457 increase. And for FY25, comparing the money committees approved to the governor's recommended, about a $487 increase.
Okay, thank you. And it looks like that's not necessarily attributable to an increase in any of these areas. It looks like there's an increase in them all. Is that right? The plan tiers, the plan weights, the categorical programs.
Yes, there was the education stabilization account that reached its cap and the balance forward that was not reflected in the governor's recommended budget. That contributed to this. As well, you would note the projected enrollment went down compared to governor's recommended budget. So that also affected the per pupil amount in the money committee approved per pupil amount.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad that you mentioned that because it seems to me we in the money committee approved, we have less projected enrollment, but still in each year, additional dollars proposed in both fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25. Is that right?
That is correct. Again, that balance forward was reflected in the first year, and general fund appropriation was moved compared to governor's recommended from year 1 to year 2 to kind of smooth that out, as well as I mentioned, the enrollment decrease.
Okay, thank you so much.
Questions? Other questions? Senator Cuccia.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I don't know, I'm just looking at some raw numbers here. It's got to be an error. I see the food services for Eureka are 400,000. and Elko is 383. That's a 20-to-1 difference in enrollment. I'm hoping that's an error. Either that or we better quit making them walk to school because they're getting too hungry because
Senator, that information is reported by the school districts in their NRS 387-303 reports, and it is a 4-year average. I would note, too, that some districts do use some of their general fund to support their food services. Others, support it with fees and federal dollars as well, so that may account for that disparity that you're seeing there.
all right, I was just thinking maybe it was an error. It just, it's huge compared to Carson City at 400,000 and Eureka at 400,000. There's no comparison in the number of students. So, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Additional questions? You wore us out. I feel like I have some, but I need to digest the information. Mr. Drost, please go ahead.
Madam Chair, just to respond to Senator Gokich's question as well, I would note Eureka County School District is also on hold harmless. So they're receiving that FY 2020 baseline amount. So that is also contributing to that kind of disparity you're seeing there with that hold harmless provision.
Okay, it's just, I'm having a hard time computing how I realize they're a hold harmless county, but how they could ever spend 400,000 feeding those 400 kids. They're feeding them well. Thank you.
All right. If there are no more questions, Ms. Ryan, Mr. Drost, and Ms. Camacho Poco, thank you for your time and your expertise. We appreciate you this evening. And with that, we actually need to introduce these BDRs, 1207 and 1208. So, Mr. Thorley, would you take over for a minute?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Wayne Thorley for the record, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. So fiscal staff presented 5 BDRs to the Finance Committee this evening. However, 3 of those will become Assembly bills. 2 of them will be Senate bills. Those 2 are BDR 1207, the Authorizations Act, and then BDR 1208, the K-12 Education Funding Bill, which the committee just heard. So the committee, both these BDRs require committee introduction before being introduced on the floor. So the committee will need to take a vote to introduce both those BDRs.
I would accept a motion.
I'd so move to refer BDR 1207 and BDR 1208.
Thank you very much, Senator Wynn. A second? Second by Senator Neal. Any discussion on those motions? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. Thank you very much. All right, last thing on our agenda today is public comment. And just as a reminder, the number is 888-475-4499. The meeting ID is 894-8551-0892, and press pound, and then participant ID, press pound. Carson City, is there anyone here for public comment? Seeing none in Las Vegas. BPS, is there anyone on the line?
Thank you, Chair. If you would like to offer public comment for today's meeting, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
Good evening. Chris Daly, Nevada State Education Association, the voice of Nevada educators for over 120 years. Last week, nearly 1,000 educators and supporters rallied in front of the legislature, umbrellas in hand, to say it's a rainy day in Nevada, and so it's time for 20, meaning a 20% raise for every Nevada educator, starting pay of $20 an hour, and average class sizes of 20 students. Certainly, Nevada's strong economy and record revenue is welcome news, but there's still a rainy day for Nevada schools. Nevada ranks 48th in education funding, even behind Mississippi, and everyone knows Nevada has the largest class sizes in the nation. The crisis of educator vacancies has reached a tipping point. In the last 2 years, Nevada will lose more than 15% of our teaching workforce. Nevada also has a serious problem with vacancies in classified positions, meaning we are short people who make our schools run. Nevada's severe educator shortage threatens the basic function of our school system. It's a rainy day for Nevada schools. The proposed K-12 budget is an increase of 26% over this biennium and $318 million more than the governor's recommendation. While that is certainly promising, this news is blunted by minimal increases in previous years that also had record inflation, eating away most of this year's proposed increases. Along with this, the budget also raises the education stabilization account gap from 15 to 20%, which would stash away an additional $322 million, meaning the legislature adjusted GovRec with a larger increase for reserves than for our schools. It turns out the biggest beneficiary of additional funding are charters, with a 41% increase in the biennium worth over $400 million. On the other side of the ledger, Story County will lose 5% of its total budget. Sadly, the rising tide will not lift all boats. When combining the education stabilization account with the state rainy day fund, reserves could approach nearly $3 billion by the end of next biennium, 7 times the state's previous high of $401 million. NSCA believes it is fiscally irresponsible to underfund education and overinflate reserves when we can't retain educators or fill their positions when they leave. Throughout this session, you've heard from a parade of educators about the hardships of working in education with low pay and increasingly stressful working conditions. And last week, educators showed up with the thunder and the lightning. We implore you to redirect monies from the rainy day reserves to fund Time for 20. It's a rainy day for Nevada schools. Thank you.
Thank you, BPS. Next caller, please.
Thank you, Chair. That concludes all callers for public comment at this time.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll be heading down to floor, so we'll see you all there, and this meeting is adjourned.